And we are live. Welcome to another episode of Unscripted. And I have the great pleasure to introduce Christopher Lehman, the executive and CEO for Safeguard Cyber. How are you, Chris?
I'm fantastic, David. Thank you for having me.
And you have a busy schedule. You're currently on the go traveling, and I do very, very much appreciate having the time to chat with me today. But before we get started, just to ease yourself into it, you have an extensive background in tech and in cyber. Just for the people that are not familiar with what you've done so far, do you mind just walking us through memory lane?
Yeah, sure. Well, so I've been in technology and technology sales for coming up on 25 years now. And, I've had an opportunity to work with what I believe are some of the most successful and world-class technology organizations in the world. Companies like EMC, companies like Salesforce. And after spending a lot of time and a lot of years helping companies manage data and manage content effectively, back in 2014, I had an opportunity to join up with somebody who's been a mentor of mine for my entire career, Dave DeWalt. And for David, you may know who Dave is. Some of your listeners may not, but Dave was the CEO of a company called Documentum, where we originally met, then went on to become the CEO of McAfee. And after McAfee, he became the CEO at FireEye. And I was looking for a new opportunity, and the team at FireEye had reached out, and I had a chance to reconnect with Dave and spend a number of years at FireEye. And then I left FireEye in the 2017 time period and went to work for a company called ExtraHop, who is in the network detection and response space. And we sold that business last year successfully. It was a $900 million sale of the company. And I was running the sales organization there. And I was then, after we had sold that business to Bain, I was looking for my next opportunity, had an opportunity to connect with Dave. Actually, it was at Black Hats in 2021 in Las Vegas. And he told me about this great company where it was a part of one of his portfolio businesses. So Dave, after being the CEO at FireEye, started a venture capital investment firm called Night Dragon. And they focus exclusively on cybersecurity businesses. And Dave told me about this business that he said, look, it's got great technology. It's got this great kind of market opportunity where they're solving a really big problem. And they're looking for a new CEO. And he kind of tapped me to play that role for him at Safeguard. And I joined here about a year ago.
Yeah, what an amazing journey. Do you sometimes feel that all this stuff that you've done so far, like all those experiences, were kind of led you to the kind of the perfect positioning to take kind of the next step in the journey?
Absolutely. I mean, it's maybe, it's a little cliche, but, you hear people say, well, I feel like, all my life I've been preparing for this moment, right? And not to be dramatic about it, but, I think that in any career, you hopefully are learning new skills and getting new experiences at every step in your career, regardless of whether you're at the beginning, middle, or end of your career, and regardless of the kind of company you're working for. And one of the things that I've always tried to be a student of the game when it comes to my profession, and really understanding, well, what makes great companies, and why is it that some companies are wildly successful and other companies struggle. And I think that companies that are world-class do certain things exceptionally well. And, doing little things like very clearly articulating and understanding the problem that you're solving for your customers and what your value proposition is. It all starts with that vision. And then after really developing a vision and providing a compelling value proposition for customers and the market, it's then all about executing, right? And making sure you've got great people who are on your team, who are thinking about the problems that the market is trying to solve, and then just working a little bit harder than anybody else. So, yeah, I mean, I feel like I was able to take learnings and knowledge at every company where I worked, and trying to apply that to safeguard cyber.
And Christopher, this is the kind of the first time that you are a chief executive officer. So I mean, you've held very senior roles in the majority of the companies in your past,
Mm-hmm.
but this time this is the top role.
Mm-hmm.
Did when you took on you always say, hey, get hired for the job they want, not the job they had.
Yeah.
And David DeWalt obviously did just that. Do you find there's any particular nuances, or what was the first 60 days were like? Did you feel any different? I know the chief revenue officer typically is responsible for a lot of moving parts in an organization, and it's a make or break role, right? So nothing happens until somebody sells something, but a chief executive officer has that plus.
Well, yeah, I've had to. I'm a career sales leader, who in the last year moved into the CEO role, and obviously, just your purview and scope of responsibility is much broader. As a sales leader, you're responsible for managing and executing the go-to-market. And go-to-market is obviously a huge part of successful businesses, and I've got a ton of experience there. But the other really important part of the business is the vision and the technology. You need to have all three parts. You've got to have great vision, you've got to have great product, and you've got to have great go-to-market. And the opportunity at Safeguard Cyber, it's a company that really has strong foundational technology. And the area where it needed the most work was really refining the vision and the go-to-market execution. And that's why, I think Dave felt like it was a good fit for me, and I felt like it was a good fit for me because I could apply my experience in developing world-class go-to-markets and sales teams, and apply that to a business which has this massive market opportunity. And that's what I've really been focused on. I focus on all aspects of the business, obviously, and that's my job as CEO. But, job one was to, when I came into the business, really refine the vision and better articulate the value proposition for the business to the market.
So Christopher, let's talk a bit about the problem you're solving. This Somebody is always saying, hey, you better, if you're tackling a problem, it better be a very large problem, worth solving. And you mentioned specifically a market opportunity. Would you be able to describe it very quickly, in a nutshell, what is the main problem for Safe Cyber that solves to its customers? In how did that originate? Why are we there? Why has no one ever solved this problem before?
Yeah, great question. So, the very brief answer, and then I want to give you some more insight into what we're doing. Very brief answer is that we provide security and compliance solutions for enterprises' communication channels, regardless of where that communication is occurring, whether it's in email or in a collaboration platform like a Slack or a Teams, or a messaging application like WhatsApp or Telegram, social channels, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram. And really what Safeguard Cyber is all about is addressing what we call truths, and there's truth, trends, and threats that the enterprise is facing today. And some of the big trends and fundamental truths that organizations and security teams really need to recognize are the fact that, number one, human beings are always going to be the most vulnerable element or weakest element in any security strategy, right? We are trusting by nature, human beings, and the human eye literally cannot detect a lot of the attacks that that are targeted against them. It really doesn't matter how much training we do of our employees and of human beings. They're simply not going to be able to identify some of the threats that they face on a day-to-day basis. And the data really backs this up, David, and I'm sure you know this. 82% of all breaches that occurred last year were the result of the exploitation of the human in one way, shape, or form or another. That's according to the Verizon breach report, right? And we don't see that changing. We think education is very, very important in a security strategy for an enterprise. But like I said, it doesn't matter how much training you do. The sophistication that attackers have are going to enable them to hide behind messages and communications that the victim and the target just aren't going to be able to see or notice. So, the
Christopher,
trend.
I want to. Okay, go ahead.
I was just going to say. So
I want to just double click on that specifically because it's so important. 82%. I think we had to almost pause for 20 seconds to let people sink in what the impact is. And you mentioned it's not changing because human nature is not changing. We are product of evolutionary development over millions of years, and we want to be helpful.
That's right.
If you have some stories related, because you're exposed to a lot of your customer facing as well. So would you mind just describing maybe scrubbing some of the details so people, because you gave it the high level statistics. What does it boil down to? Give me an example of something that happened that basically describes that in more details and gives people some context.
Well, so I'm gonna get right to that because it's a great question. But I think it's important to talk about, like I said, there's fundamental truths, there's these mega trends, and then there's the threats that we're facing, and this is what we've based the business on. So, fundamental truth number one that everybody needs to recognize, and to your point, we need to let it sink in. 82% of all breaches are the result of the exploitation of human vulnerabilities, right? And that's number one. Number two, the way we communicate has changed dramatically over the last decade, right? And it was really with the popularity of the smartphone, right? And the popularity of cloud-based communication channels. It's no longer just about email, right? We know that 45%, another statistic, 45% of all business communication now takes place outside of email. It's happening in collaboration applications like a Teams or like a Slack. It's happening in messaging apps like WhatsApp and Telegram. It's happening in social channels like LinkedIn, right? There's a brand new world out there in terms of the way we communicate. And this is a trend that, again, we don't see abating. We think that we are going to continue to evolve and find new ways to communicate. Businesses want to be agile. They want to meet their customers where they are and engage with those customers and prospects in a way that the customer and prospect wants to communicate. And that means embracing these new communication channels. All right. But when you combine the fact that human beings are vulnerable with the fact that the way they're communicating has changed, it's created this recipe and massive vulnerability and security gap that security organizations really have not addressed just yet. They've invested a ton of time, money, resource in making email more secure. And despite that, we know that a lot of people are still falling victim to, phishing attacks and impersonation in email. But you need to then step back and recognize that a security team can't just focus on securing email. You got to focus on all the other ways that your employees are communicating. And this leads to the last point, and to get back to your question around, specific examples, the tactics that attackers are using today have also evolved, right? And increasingly, they're using social engineering attacks. They're using language-based attacks to target and gain access to information that they want to gain access to. And by and large, security teams have not adjusted to this new reality. So you think about, and by the way, traditional security technologies aren't designed to detect these language-based attacks, these social engineering attacks. And two very recent examples of this are the Uber breach and the Take-Two breach that occurred. This was about 2 or 3 months ago now. And in both instances, the attacker used social engineering as a tactic, and they executed the attack in alternative communication channels like WhatsApp. And what we've seen in the security world, we're all familiar with the concept of a low and slow attack, where the attacker is starting off in one place and then very slowly moving laterally until they identify a vulnerability or a victim and target that they can basically compromise and then gain access to information, do damage, steal information, hold the target victim, hold the target hostage for a ransomware. But the concept of low and slow attacks don't just occur across infrastructure and applications. They happen across communication channels. And in the case of Uber and in Take-Two, and again, Take-Two, for those of you in the audience who may not be familiar with them, they're the owners of and the producers of the Grand Theft Auto gaming franchise, one of the most popular gaming franchises in the world, multi-billion dollar business. And the attacker basically started off the attack by doing impersonation and using social engineering in WhatsApp. And once they were able to basically gain the trust and access to the user, they used that impersonation to get the individual to move the conversation to other parts and other applications like Slack and Teams. And then from there, they were able to collect information. And then eventually, they were able to gain access to the networks of those companies and exfiltrate data. In the case of Take-Two and the Grand Theft Auto breach, attacker was basically publishing news and providing video and clips about what the new release of Grand Theft Auto was going to look like. And that may not seem like a big deal, but for a $1 billion franchise to have the new release of their product go to market before it was ready can do significant damage to the financial success of the ultimate release of the product when it was ready. So, I mean, those are two recent examples where social engineering was used. They leveraged alternative communication channels to gain access and compromise their target, and then ultimately gain access to the network and information and do exfiltration. There's huge brand damage and costs associated to that. I mean, those are the kind of problems that we're helping organizations solve.
Yeah, and if anything, the folks today, the way they communicate, right? It's like a multi-channel approach. So you can start having a conversation with someone, over Slack. You move to WhatsApp, then you move to text. Especially the kind of the younger generation, they do not care what platform you're using. So it's almost the issue is even exacerbated because you don't know where the communications are going to go next. And so you have to have the ability to monitor all of those. And you are using something that's called natural language understanding is part of your process to protect organization. If you don't mind, can you provide a 30-second primer of what that is and how is that important for for the protection of organization from this attack vector?
Sure. Well, first, there's really three things that I would want your audience to understand about Safeguard Cyber in terms of what we're doing, and I'll talk about natural language understanding and what we call contextual analysis. But your point about communications occurring across multiple channels, The first thing that we do is to provide unified visibility. So provide one pane of glass to gain visibility into all of these different communication channels that the employee is using. And, I'm a big believer that you can't secure what you can't see. So security, really needs to start with visibility. And what we do is provide unified visibility into all these channels. So that's number one. Number two, it's this concept of what we call contextual analysis. And contextual analysis is what enables us to detect threats that the traditional security technology misses. These are language-based attacks, social engineering attacks, where there's not necessarily any delivery of malware. There's no malicious file. There's no malicious link. They're using tactics like impersonation, urgency, deception in the communication to convince their target to do something that they shouldn't. It might be a password reset. It might be, providing and moving a conversation to an unsecure channel where malware could be delivered. And what we do, yeah, go ahead.
And one thing I mentioned, again, double clicking what you just described, this is how it happens, right? You mentioned sense of urgency. So you're an executive, you're on your way on vacation, the kids are screaming in the background, and all of a sudden you get a text that looks like it's coming from one of your colleagues asking you for a password for for like a privileged system. And you have two things, right? The sense of urgency and then the chaos in the background that throws you off. You just want to deal with it and move on. And this is the perfect moment, the perfect storm of what you just described. Is that correct?
Absolutely. I mean, that is, so oftentimes what we'll see, if you think about the kill chain, right? The kill chain and where the attack starts is happening much, much earlier than organizations realize. Oftentimes, for example, there'll be some reconnaissance that's occurring via a connection or communication on a channel like LinkedIn, right? A lot of business communication now takes place via LinkedIn and direct messages that occur on that platform. So oftentimes an attacker will start to do reconnaissance, right, where they're gathering information about the ultimate target. They'll befriend and connect with the individual on LinkedIn. Maybe there's some communication there, and it's creating a sense of familiarity with the target, right? But then, and by the way, we know that LinkedIn is the channel where the most spoofing, it's the most spoofed brand in the world right now. And so there's spoofing that's occurring there. There's impersonation that's occurring there. Organizations don't have any controls in place to detect when that's occurring. So, but that's where the attacker it's a channel they're using to gain trust, gain access, gain information. They'll then move that communication to a place like email, or they'll move that communication after they've already, initiated it in LinkedIn. They'll move to email, or they'll move to a collaboration channel. And maybe the way that they've gotten access to that collaboration channel is through stolen credentials. And through, they've harvested users' credentials. They now have access to a place like WhatsApp or Telegram or Slack or Teams or email, and they'll initiate a further conversation. Maybe they'll make reference to the communication and where it started originally in LinkedIn. So they're gradually gaining trust, right? And then in that moment of weakness, right, they'll ask for the conversation to move to a different channel, which most organizations don't have secure, like a Teams or a Slack or a WhatsApp or a Telegram. And then that's when they'll deliver a malicious file or malicious link, or they'll ask them to go to, a new website or location that's not being monitored. And, this is the gradual kind of low and slow communication-based attack and social engineering attack that we see all the time. But to your point, David, it's gaining the trust of the victim, and then gradually escalating your privilege and access to information via the initial connection. And part of what we try and do for organizations is help them identify when that attack is occurring much, much earlier, prior to any kind of malware being delivered. Does that make sense?
Yeah, absolutely. And tell me, why does the context so important, and how does Safeguard looks at it? Because it's not enough for you to monitor the channels. The context is super important, and I'm assuming you harness a lot of there's a lot of back end magic that happens within the data centers for the company, just to realize what is the conversation about, and then sift through the noise through signal ratio to figure out what out of all those conversation, what is malicious.
Sure. Well, so this is where natural language processing and natural language understanding comes in. If you think about traditional approaches for security of communication channels, they rely primarily on things like the SEG, right? The secure email gateway, where they're using maybe some kind of DMARC, or they're using keyword search and identification, but they're very, very kind of crude, not sophisticated approaches to securing messages. And then you've got behavioral analysis based technologies, which are really looking for deviations from normal behavior. And the way they're doing that is by analyzing and looking for deviations in the metadata. So the time that the message was sent, where the message is being sent from. And they'll use that as a way to look for abnormal behavior. The problem with those approaches is that none of them look inside at the actual text of the conversation. And this is where language-based attacks occur that use those techniques that I mentioned earlier: deception, impersonation, urgency. And what we do with natural language understanding and natural language processing is we look at how the why and the how of the conversation. Is the intent of the message to do something like escalate privilege or gain access to information? What are the tactics and techniques that are being used in the conversation? Again, urgency, deception. And by looking at the why and the how of the conversation, and this is where all the magic happens, we're using this combination of natural language understanding with machine learning to analyze the conversation and identify when techniques are being used, which are strong indicators of malicious behavior.
And this particular attack vector, which is a huge gap as we discussed, is not going away. If anything, with the introduction of Chat GPT, in the past several months, the potential harnessing of that AI technology to reach out to people, impersonating, creating personas, creating these en masse type of attacks is ever increasing, even now exponentially. Is that the case?
Well, absolutely. And so, part of what we do is to create a baseline understanding of how individuals communicate. And by creating a baseline, we can then identify when a user is being impersonated or being targeted, right? And by because we're constantly we're analyzing millions and millions and millions of conversations, so our technology is advanced enough so that we can see when David all of a sudden is using a word that he never ever uses, and well, look, that's a red flag. Maybe that's an indication that this is an individual who's impersonating David. Yeah, and by creating a baseline understanding of how people communicate, running the conversations that they're having, regardless of where the conversation is happening, through our analysis engine and leveraging tools like machine learning and artificial intelligence, which is what Chat GPT is, we can identify when an individual may be being impersonated, or if there's if it's an inbound message, when they're using techniques which, as I mentioned earlier, might be strong indicators of an attack and bad behavior.
And Christopher, I hope your system leaves some wiggle room. What if I potentially sign up for a philosophy course, at the master's level, all of a sudden start using big words to impress my colleagues. I'm assuming that the system, has some provisions for that as well, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's part of what, makes it a technology that can be used in practice. It is a very, very smart and nuanced system that's leveraging the kind of latest and greatest techniques in machine learning and artificial intelligence. And, having a high efficacy and high accuracy rate is extremely important. We don't want to contribute to the noise. We want to help, identify the signal from the noise, as you mentioned earlier.
So tell me, I'm watching this and it's a concern of mine. What does and I want to give it a try. I want to just to run it and potentially even find out, how can the company help me? What does the process of implementing looks like? What should I expect in the first, 30 days? Does it play well with other systems? You mentioned multi-channel approach and so on. Can you describe it quickly? What does that look like?
Well, so one of the great things about Safeguard Cyber is that we're an API-based technology. And what that means is that we are deployed via API to API integrations. So no data feed is required, no agent is required. So the deployment is very, very fast and very, very easy. We can literally be up and running and monitoring communication channels within 5 minutes. So the way we work with the market is to say, look, don't take our word for it. Let us prove to you that this is a vulnerability, a gap in your security, and give you insight as to where you are at risk. And so we'll work with companies and say our recommendation is that you start with 3 channels. So let's start with M365 and Teams and LinkedIn, or M365, Slack, and WhatsApp. And we'll pick these channels and we then deploy it, and we run the technology for 30 days. And we, at the end of that 30 days, we basically come back and provide what we call to the prospect or customer a risk report. And what that risk report does is help them identify where they have gaps and vulnerabilities in their security. Oftentimes we do find very active attacks in real time, and obviously we'll notify the customer of that so action can be taken. But being an API-based technology means it's very, very low friction. It doesn't have any risk of disrupting your existing system. So there's really no downside to the prospect to evaluate the technology and see what kind of insights it can provide. One of the other things, so in terms of the values that we provide, we mentioned unified visibility. We talked a lot about contextual analysis, our ability to understand the context and intent of a communication. But the third thing we do is what we call cross-channel correlation. When you are under attack, one of the questions that a security team and an investigation team needs to understand very, very quickly is, what's the blast radius associated to this attack? How far reaching is it? And one of the things that's very unique about Safeguard Cyber is our ability to identify and understand how far reaching an attack may be. We may detect the attack in WhatsApp, or we may detect the attack in email, but we then have the ability to understand and identify what other communications may be related to this attack campaign. So, okay, yeah, we detected a BEC attack in M365, but we can then identify where conversations related to that may have occurred, because it's going to spider out, right? You detected an email, but then we can say, but this communication in Slack or Teams is related to this. It may go all the way back to communications that started off in LinkedIn. Our ability to correlate and identify how far-reaching the attack has been and across multiple communication channels is a very, very powerful tool for security operation teams and investigation teams to understand just how much damage has been done and how far-reaching was the attack. Does that make sense?
And Christopher, yeah, absolutely. And Christopher, that's important because the, it's just, people always say, okay, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when. And the remediation piece is super important. If you can reduce the time to remediation by 30, 40, 50%, by knowing the causation, by knowing the, as you mentioned, the scope of the attack, it has tremendous value to remediation and basically getting back on track and getting the company back in order, the operations back in order. That can be, night and day in terms of how the company recovers, right?
Absolutely. I mean, time to response is super important. And, I've seen so many instances where security teams are, they're trying to contain the damage. But again, until you understand how far reaching the attack has been, it's really hard to get your hands around that and contain the damage. So again, our ability to understand the blast radius is super important to assuring organizations that they've got things under control.
So, Christopher, that next time I'm trying to impersonate somebody and I reach out to you, I know that that I most likely will get flagged. Maybe I should I should give it a try.
Yeah,
um,
it's I seem to be a very popular impersonation person. Well, it's interesting. So at our company, obviously, in my role, I'm the most spoofed person at Safeguard Cyber, right? And our system detects these attacks and these impersonations. But I mean, it's a very real issue, again, I see it at our company. And for organizations who aren't monitoring these alternative communication channels, I think, security teams really need to acknowledge this risk and this gap and vulnerability, and they need to take action. I mean, I know a lot of security practitioners are struggling to put the basics in, but I believe strongly that, and it comes back to these trends we identified at the beginning. Humans are the most vulnerable part of your security strategy. The way we communicate has changed, and the tactics that attackers are using have evolved in such a way that your existing security stack cannot detect them. And the first step is acknowledging these risks. And I think security, and this is a longer conversation maybe for another day, but I think the security industry has things upside down. When 82% of breaches happen as a result of the exploitation of human beings, well, the Pareto principle would tell you, you want to spend the majority of your time, resource, money, et cetera, on the parts of your business where you can have the biggest impact. And I see the industry and believe that the industry has it upside down. We spend so much time trying to secure infrastructure and applications when the fact of the matter is vulnerabilities in infrastructure and applications represent only 4% of the breaches that occur, right? 4% versus 82% in terms of how these attacks are occurring. And I believe that if you believe in the 80-20 or the Pareto principle, organizations will be well served to dedicate more of their time trying to secure the human, as opposed to trying to secure infrastructure, because the human is where the majority of the vulnerability exists.
yeah, maybe the issue, Christopher, is that when you're selling hammers, everything is a nail. So some of the companies out there, the solution they have to they have to provide that, and that's what that's what they're going to market with. So they have to tout the fact that there's vulnerabilities everywhere, including the networks, including the endpoints, and so
Sure. Well, and
you
look,
know.
it's not that those things aren't important. They obviously are important to be secured. It's a question of just, where can you have the biggest impact, right? And like, what are you going to prioritize, and how much are you going to spend on securing infrastructure versus securing humans. And I've challenged CIOs and CISOs with this question, and the response I always get is, well, you're right, Chris, but we're not necessarily sure how to secure the human. Like, they know how to secure infrastructure. They know how to secure the application. They struggle with what they can do and what's in their control to secure the human. And my contention is that there's a lot that they can do to better secure the human. It's just an awareness issue, right? And it starts with, again, the acknowledgement of these, truths and trends and the threats that exist in the marketplace.
Absolutely, Chris. And I hope the humans are here to stay, that we're not getting displaced by any AI technologies anytime soon. And until then, Chris, what's the easiest way for people to reach out to you, to know more, just to get some information about how to move forward with the company and so on?
Yeah, sure. Well, I would encourage the listeners to visit our website at safeguardcyber.com. There's tons of great information about what we do and how we can help your organization on the website. So I would start there. And, if not our website, you can feel free to, hit me up on LinkedIn, and certainly happy to start the conversation there as well.
Fantastic. Chris Lehman, thank you very much for taking the time to chat with me today. It's been a real pleasure. And I can't wait to see where Safeguard Cyber goes next and where you're going to be next, and, growing the business and bringing it to the next level like you've done so many times before. Thank you again for joining me. For all those who joined, thanks very much. Stay safe online as well as offline. I'll see you in the next episode.
Thanks, David.